Welcome to the Gentleman Project Podcast. I'm Cory Moore.
And I'm Kirk Chugg. Today in the studio, we have Davis Smith with us. He's from Cotopaxi. He's done a lot of cool things in this world. We're excited to have him here. We're going to let him talk a little bit about his personal background, maybe some business background, let the folks know who they're listening to today. But we're excited to be able to have Davis in the studio this morning.
This is great to be here. It's I'm actually out of my house, which is really nice.
Actually in studio, not on a Zoom.
No, so we've been talking this morning, and we all have kids around the same age, and I think we're going to have a great conversation this morning. So Davis, tell us a little bit about your background, maybe your family makeup, and a little bit of business background.
Yeah, happy to do that. I'm actually one of 8 kids, so a pretty big family. I'm the second of 8, and when I was 4 years old, my family left the United States, and we moved to the Dominican Republic. And so that's where I grew up in Latin America, moved to a few different countries in Central and South America. And, those experiences really shaped who I was. My dad is an adventurer, so I spent a lot of time in the outdoors. We made our own raft and floated the Amazon River.
Cool.
Yeah, fishing for piranha. And we would go survive on uninhabited islands, and we made spears that we'd go use to spear fish and eat coconuts to survive. So
sounds like a movie.
Yeah, I thought this was normal behavior, and just had a really wonderful childhood. I learned to love the outdoors and adventure, but I think more importantly, I developed a deep sense of empathy for other people. Understanding how lucky I was. I remember as a 4-year-old seeing children my age, 3 or 4 years old, that were completely naked on the sides of the street. And just, even at that age, I knew something was wrong. And it was hard to reconcile why my life was so different. And I didn't come from a wealthy family. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had opportunities that these other kids would never have. And so from the time I was a kid, I knew that's what I wanted to use my life for. So I ended up going to college here in Utah, went to BYU. And when I was there, I was trying to figure out how I could use my life to help others. I kind of assumed I maybe work for a nonprofit, kind of explored a lot of different things. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but ended up kind of landing on this path of entrepreneurship. My wife and I met at BYU. We got married while we were in school, very BYU of us. And shortly after graduation, we had our first child. So started a family really young. I have 2 daughters, a 17-year-old and a 15-year-old, and then 2 little boys, a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Very cool.
And for those who can't see Davis in the studio, you're thinking, no way you have a 17-year-old. Because he looks pretty darn young to have a 17-year-old.
I don't know about that. I will say this. So I for those that can't see me, I have a shaved head, and it's basically looked the same for like 15 years. So that is one thing, is like when your hair doesn't gray or anything like that, you definitely preserve your age in some ways. You look like you're 50 when you're 25, and then you slowly grow into that age. So
I like that.
So how many kids you have now?
So 4.
Yeah, 4 kids now.
The 2 girls and then 2 boys. And we have like a 10-year gap in between our first 2 and our second 2. That wasn't intentional. It's just the way it worked for us. So feel really lucky to have the ones we have. And we had kind of started over after 10 years, and it couldn't have been better.
But those 2 little boys, but those big sisters love those 2 little boys.
Yeah, our 2-year-old, he's almost 3. He still calls our 2 daughters mom. He calls them mama, not by their names. So it's really cute.
That's great.
So those boys have been our entertainment during COVID. So we're glad we have them.
That's great. So take us back to that journey. So you're at BYU, you get married, you start a family. What happens next?
My wife and I, we met about halfway through our time at BYU. I really wanted her to have an experience in Latin America where I'd grown up. And so we found an internship that we could do together, which was really, really fun. And we went to Peru, and we worked for a nonprofit. And we had no money, of course. And, it was a really special experience together. We lived in a little room of this family in Lima, and bed bugs. I mean, it was just like we go out eaten alive the whole time we were there. But I remember we had a tradition that every week we'd go buy a little package of Oreos. And there's in South America, they have these little package of 4 Oreo cookies. And so every other day was Oreo day, and we'd split an Oreo together every other day. And that was like our splurge. You know, it was like, I don't remember how much it cost, probably less than $1 probably to buy that thing. But it was like, for us, it was like a splurge to buy these Oreos. So, but we spent every day was spent on helping other people and connecting with a community of people that we really learned to love. It certainly shaped the path that we went on as a married couple.
So before you go on with your story, let me ask you a question about what growing up the way you did taught you. You know, we're the Gentleman Project podcast, so we're talking about, what things as you were growing up with your dad and creating rafts and going down the Amazon. And then even with your wife, as you're kind of starting out and you're kind of seeing the world from different viewpoint than most people. What things did that teach you about who you are today and what you wanted to be?
I think we created a lot of, I'm a big believer in rituals and traditions that you can establish as a family. And I don't know that my parents did it intentionally. I don't think it was done intentionally or deliberately, but there were a lot of rituals and traditions that we developed as a family around spending time outside, about serving others. So we always were looking at ways that we could help people around us. I spent a lot of time at orphanages and doing service as a family. Thanksgiving, every Thanksgiving, it was us filling these big baskets full of food and other supplies, and then driving around and delivering them to families that we saw that maybe lived in the streets or lived in little shacks or things. And
man, what a growing up you had.
It was really special. I feel just so grateful to my parents for teaching us those values, those things that mattered most. And with a big family, of course, you don't have a lot. It's like I got 1 pair of shoes every year. It was like, we'd come back to the United States for summer vacation, and I get 1 pair of shoes, and it was like, I felt so lucky. It's like I got to wear a pair of Nikes or whatever. Like those were so cool. They were the cheap Nikes that you bought at like Ross or something, but they didn't have the air bubble, or I couldn't afford the Reebok pumps. I couldn't pump my shoe up. But.
We grew up in the same time.
So what did this? So service sounds like was a big part of your culture as a family and outdoors. Why is service? It sounds like why is service important? Why is it important to you and your family?
Well, I think anytime, I'm sure you guys have both experienced this as well, but like joy and happiness really comes from thinking beyond yourself.
Right.
And this is something that I think we have to learn as humans over and over again, because it's so easy to forget. I listened to a podcast recently with the founder of Tom's Shoes, Blake. He's become someone I admire a lot, and he's an investor in Cotopaxi, my business, and has become a friend. And in this podcast, he talked about, how his life was, pretty amazing. He's made more money than he could ever spend. And he built a business that was around helping others. And he said that even then he found at the end of it all, like he felt directionless in some way. And I think in life, sometimes we end up getting self-absorbed into the things that we really think matter. And sometimes we realize at the end, like those don't really matter. They don't bring the happiness that we thought they would. And so I think the more that we're out serving and thinking of others, I think the happier we always are. And so I can share maybe one story that I think maybe in my life really reflects this. So my wife and I talked about how we lived in Peru, and we were in a little city in Cusco, which is the longest continuously inhabited city in the Americas. This is where, the capital of the Incan Empire, and just a magical place. We got there and it was just, I couldn't believe it.
Isn't it like 9,000 feet above sea level or something?
Exactly. Really high. A lot of people end up getting altitude sickness when you get there. But there's ruins everywhere. And all these old Spanish buildings are built on top of, Incan ruins that they kind of knocked down, or there's a lot of the original Incan structures still around. And, the first few hours there, I was like, I just couldn't get enough of it. So I told my wife, it's like, oh, let's like not eat inside a restaurant. Let's like eat in the main plaza and just like soak in the magic of the city. Like, so we got some food, sat on this bench, and just, you're surrounded by these amazing buildings and these mountains. And, you can hear like, this old, Incan music being played through like traditional instruments in the background. And, pretty soon all these little kids ran up to us and they were trying to sell us things, finger puppets and postcards and candy. And having grown up in Latin America, I immediately connected with these kids and, started joking around with them a little bit. And after a while, they ran off. One little boy, his name was Edgar, 9 years old, sat next to me on his shoe shining kit. And he kept insisting that he wanted to shine my shoes. I'm wearing tennis shoes, right? So it's like, it took a while to convince him it's not possible to shine my shoes. But he kept sitting there, and I recognized maybe he's sitting here watching us eat because he's hungry. So I offered him the rest of my food. And I never remember seeing somebody eat like this before. He just absolutely devoured it. That night as we were eating dinner, we decided, hey, why don't we go save some of our food and go look for this little boy? Let's go look for Edgar again. And he was always easy to spot. He had a hole in the butt of his pants with no underwear on. So you could always see him from a distance. And we went out to the main plaza, and sure enough, we found him straight away. And he was so surprised that we'd come back to look for him. And he took the food that we gave him and he ran it over and started sharing it with all of his friends. And they were eating this food with their hands. And it really touched us. And this became a daily ritual for us. The highlight of every day was finding Edgar. And our last night in Cusco, we were walking back to our place close to midnight. It was cold. You could see your breath in the air. And as we were walking down the street, we saw two little boys cuddled, sleeping together on the sidewalk on the other side. So we walked across the street. And as we got closer, we saw that one of the little boys was our friend, Edgar. And I knew a little bit about his family. And I woke him up, and he rubbed his eyes, and I could tell he'd been crying. You could see these tear stains on his cheeks. And when he saw us, he gave us this big smile. And I was like, Edgar, like, why are you sleeping on the street? Why aren't you home? And he told me that someone had stolen his shoe shiny kit, and he was too afraid to go home. He said his dad was an alcoholic, and his mom depended on him to help feed his family. This is a 9-year-old. And so we didn't have much, but we gave him the little bit of cash that we had. And that night, I couldn't sleep. I was just so sad, just thinking about this little boy and the life that he lived. And the next morning, we got on a bus to leave Cusco for the last time. And as we were driving away, we were going around the main plaza, I looked out the window of this bus, and I saw Edgar. And he saw me, and he ran next to the bus, waving goodbye. And I had just enough time where I slid open the window of the bus, and he had this big bag of candy in his arms that he'd bought with the money we gave him. He was selling the candy in the streets. He was a little entrepreneur. And it was on that bus, my wife and I, we looked at each other, and we made a commitment. This is how we were going to use our lives. And we were going to find a way to use our lives to help kids like Edgar. And so, I thought of Edgar every single day since 2001, October, when I met him. And I think, you have these kind of experiences, and they change you. They change something inside of you. And, there's actually there's a good ending to this story. A few years ago, after starting Cotopaxi, I decided I wanted to go back to Cusco and try to find him.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. It's an impossible task, really. I only knew his first name. I knew he was 9 in 2001. I knew he shined shoes. That's it. That's all I had. But I had a picture of him sitting on his shoe shiny kit, and I had a little 12 or 13 second video of him running next to this bus waving goodbye to us. And so with those, I went into the main plaza, and I just started showing it to everyone. And within a few minutes, there was a group of maybe 60 people gathered around me, wondering why this tall, bald, white guy, was speaking Spanish and showing this picture. And a young man in the back of this crowd called out and said, I know who that is. That's one of my best friends. And we walked over to a payphone. I put some change in this phone. He dialed his number, and someone answered the phone, and I said, I'm looking for Edgar. And he said, this is Edgar. And I was so emotional. I said, there's no way you're going to remember me, but when you were 9 years old, I was here in Cusco, and we used to bring you food, and someone stole your shoe shiny kit, And he was silent for a second. He's like, I remember you. And we ended up, that was late at night. We ended up meeting the next morning on the stairs of this main cathedral in the center plaza, which is the last place I saw him. He was running next to this bus. And it was just the most emotional moment. I mean, we embraced. And so we spent a day together. He took me up into the hills of Cusco to show me his home. And as we took this little bus up into the hills and then walked up the side of this mountain to get to his little house, he told me his life story, that he'd been orphaned. His mom died giving birth to his little brother when he was 11. And his dad then died of alcohol abuse a couple of years later. So as a 13 or 14-year-old, he was orphaned, and he raised his younger brother. They lived on the streets for a bunch of years. And he was so proud to show me this house that he'd built. And so we get to this house that he's so proud to show me. And it's a house made of mud. And it has a hole in the ground for a toilet. And there was a part of me that was just like so discouraged to see how he was living. And then there was another part of me that was just so proud of him because he was so proud of what he'd done. And so we put together a plan. I asked him what his passions were, and he told me he'd always loved tourism and thought he could be a good tour guide because he knew the city of Cusco better than anyone. He'd grown up on those streets, and he'd worked with tourists his entire life, so he had some basic English. And so we found a 3-year program where he just graduated like 2 weeks ago from this program. And he's an official tour guide. And during the pandemic, we created a virtual tour. So he created a virtual video tour of Cusco. And we ended up raising around $12,000 in basically like $10 and $20 donations to like tips to him and his video tour. So he's supporting his family and building a little business of his own. It's just so fun.
What a story.
My word. Yeah, they need to make a movie out of that. Seriously. I think that it goes hand in hand with what we talk about every week with our guests. It's trying to find that spark that, like last week, we had Brady Murray on, and he talked about, when you get lost in a cause bigger than yourself, you'll witness miracles. And when we can teach our children that same thing, that happiness and joy are found looking outside of yourself, how have you created an experience for your kids to internalize that themselves?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. As a business leader, one of the things I've learned is that it's really important to build culture deliberately, by design, and not just let it happen by default.
Yeah.
And this I learned by doing it wrong. I built a couple businesses before Cotopaxi, and I didn't always get the culture right. I think we had a decent culture, but it just kind of happened, and there wasn't a lot of intention behind it. And I wanted to do that differently with Cotopaxi. So when we started the business, we identified the core values that this business and brand would stand for. We're an outdoor brand that sells backpacks and jackets and other gear. But we aren't a backpack company. We aren't a jacket company. We're a company that does good. We're a company that stands for values of giving back and serving others. And we use our profits to go support global poverty alleviation. So we wanted to build a culture and a brand that reflected those values. And we built everything in this business around those values. We had those values before we knew what we'd sell. And I ended up talking a lot about the importance of this with other entrepreneurs. And a few years ago, I was driving home from work, and I realized that I was a fraud. Like this, I'd been telling entrepreneurs to do this in their organizations, and I had not even applied this to the organization that mattered the most to me, my family. I had not built intentional culture within my own home. And so I went in and I told my wife, I was like, I don't know why, but we have never done this the right way. We are running our family like the way that I'm telling everyone to not run their businesses. We haven't done this intentionally. We haven't identified our core values. We're just kind of letting it happen as it happens, because every day is chaos, with little kids. You're just trying to like stay above water, right? So we sat down and we identified 5 core values that we felt really mattered to our family. And then we sat down with our kids, our 2 older girls, because our 2 boys were too little. And we had our girls go through the same exercise. We didn't tell them we had done it before. And magically their 5 core values like matched up perfectly with our 5. might have manipulated them slightly. But
I hear you.
But they felt they were part of the process of identifying what mattered to our family. And the 5 items match up to the letters of our last name, Smith, S-M-I-T-H. Each one of them represents something. We have them up on our wall. We have a weekly meeting on Monday nights where we talk about our core values, and we talk about our rituals and traditions that we've developed around each of those core values. And, the S stands for being selfless. It's thinking of others before yourself. And so we've built traditions and rituals around that, and around serving as a family. And I don't know if I've done as good a job as my parents did, but it's something that we care about as a family, something that we get involved with. We have refugees in our homes, and we have built relationships with really special people that have made us better. And I think that's one of the greatest lessons I've learned as a parent, is like being more intentional about building that culture, the way that you would with an organization like a business.
Yeah, I love that you shared that. That is what attracted me to the original Gentleman Project. The purposefulness that Kirk was doing with his boys. He was journaling True North principles, as I call them, and then teaching his kids about it. And I thought, that's so like on purpose. And I feel like I'm just going through the motions with my kids. Not that I'm not trying to teach them things as we're going through the motions,
sure,
but not as purposeful as what you just described, which I love, by the way, and not as purposeful as Kirk was being in journaling True North principles one at a time, which is what I started doing and why the Gentleman Project is what it is today. So I think the listeners can learn a lot from what you just said.
Well, and Kirk, and I love that idea of journaling as well. That's something I'm not great at, so I need to do better. That's the great thing about talking about these things openly, right? Because we don't talk enough about parenting. We all want to be good parents, and sometimes it's hard to talk about the things that maybe we're not doing great.
Right. It's hard to admit that you don't have that part figured out, because everybody does this job, right? If you have kids, everybody's got the same job. And when you step up and say, you know what, I don't have this figured out, or I'm struggling right now, I'm in a dark place. And I need some help. I need somebody to pull me out of this. For me, that's what the Gentleman Project has always been, is that culture of, for me, it was other dads and other men admitting to themselves that they need help and that they want to be better than they are, and living it. We've used those exact words, that you need to father by design, not by default, for years. And so, you're speaking my language.
Awesome. Love it.
I love that idea of purposely creating a culture at home. And that aha moment that you had when you were driving home, thought, that's what we want to turn on in people, is what's your aha moment? What do you talk about? What do you read? Who are you surrounding yourself with? And are you having those moments that you can say, I actually am going to remember the way that I feel right now? And I'm hoping, and the stuff that we've done so far here on the podcast, there's been some really cool feedback that we've been able to see and receive when people have said, I had an aha moment when I listened to that. So we're trying to get people to have the aha moment of saying, I want to do things by design, not by default.
Being a parent is a growing and learning experience. And because I have such a long gap, I have to parent for longer than most. So I've got more time to figure this out, I guess. But yeah, I will say too, it's a lot of fun when you start identifying some of these opportunities to do better, and you start, getting the whole family to rally around a cause and a purpose. Just like it is with a business, like with Cotopaxi, it's a really fun place to work because we are all united in purpose and we know why we exist. And our ability to attract and retain talent is better. And the same is true with your family. You're going to do a better job retaining and attracting your kids to what you're doing if you have a common purpose together.
I like that you drew those correlations, because I'm sitting here thinking about my own business, and I'm like, the amount of time I put into strategic planning, the amount of time I put into goal setting, the amount of time I put into retaining and recruiting talent and all those things. Am I doing that the same passion, the same effort with my family, who's, even more important to me by a ways, but in my business? I think that's good for everyone to ask themselves, look in the mirror. And how much time are you actually focusing on those things?
Yeah, and if you're in business, you get such a great training on how to do this within an organization. And sometimes we forget that we should be taking that back home.
Totally. Totally. So I think we've all, I have books that I've read. I have friends that I've talked to. I have this podcast of interviews, which has been fantastic for me selfishly to get a bunch of tools, right? Throughout your life, where have you found some really big, what are the things where you feel like, I have this tool from this book, or I have this tool from a friend or from a parent? Are there some tools you've gotten, and where did you get them from?
Yeah, great question. I think like everyone, family is a big tool, parents and siblings. I think those are always great resources. Those are people that love you no matter what, no matter how much you screw up, they're going to love you. I think having some close friends that you invest in those relationships, I think those are another big resource for me. I love reading. I love reading about, I have maybe a wide genre of books that I like reading, everything from business books to I love reading about adventures, and I love learning about leaders that have led adventures. For example, there's a book I just finished recently a few months ago called Island of the Lost. It is just such a good book. So it's basically, this book happens in the 1860s. There's a crew of 5. And they're in this boat, and they leave Australia, and they sail down to one of the sub-Antarctic islands where they believe they can go mine tin. And they get to this island, freezing cold. They spend a month on this island. There's no tin. And so they've used all their resources to get this boat. And they decide they're so disappointed. They're sailing back, and they hit a group of islands called the Auckland Islands. And there's a massive storm. So they go into one of the little bays to try to get some protection from the storm. They have their 2 anchors set out, and one of the chains of one of the anchors breaks. And the other anchor isn't strong enough to hold the boat. So it crashes into the shore, and they become shipwrecked. Their boat is destroyed. They're stuck on this island. 1860s, there's no sat phones, right? So there they are in the middle of nowhere, freezing cold island, one of the worst places on the planet you'd want to be deserted. They unite. And the Captain Musgrave of this boat is just a brilliant leader. And he has a great right-hand man, this French man called Reynal. And together, they rally this small crew of 5, and they elect a new leader, which they choose Captain Musgrave. But he's smart enough to say, look, I'm not the captain of the boat anymore. There is no boat. We need a leader, and we need everyone to agree on it. So everyone chose Captain Musgrave. They built a shelter, and they were ingenious. They took shells, crushed them up, burned them in this fire, and they used that mixed with water. They created like a cement, and they started building this structure. It was like 18 by 24 feet, and they built a forge where they started making nails. They took part of the sail from their boat, and they took the thread and they spun new thread. They smoked meat. They killed seals and started smoking the meat so they could preserve it, so that when there weren't seals during the migration, that they could have meat. They brewed beer. I mean, they did some amazing things. They lived on this island for 18 months. They ended up building their own boat, and 2 of them sailed to New Zealand and got rescued. And like several months later, came back with another boat and rescued the other 3. They all survived. Every night they spent learning from each other. They had school, and they would read the Bible together. And then one of the 5, they'd rotate, would teach the others something new. And the other 3 sailors didn't know how to read or write. They could have easily been dismissed or treated like they weren't as good. They were treated equally, and they developed a love for each other. The most amazing thing about the story is that at the same time, on the exact same island, there was another shipwreck. And they had no idea that these other people were on the island. And the other people didn't know these guys were on the island. The other shipwreck had 25 people, and it was a disaster. The captain of this boat was arrogant, didn't want to do anything. He wanted everyone to serve him. The group split off in factions. At the end, after 12 months, only 2 people were still living. And they got lucky enough. They saw a boat sailing by, and they were able to do smoke signals, and they got this boat to come rescue them. It was because of one of them that they even lived. But the captain survived, his right hand, and then a sailor that basically did all the work and saved them. I just love comparing these 2 examples of leaders and how they led and how they created culture. And you can just see, like, you always hear that phrase about culture eats strategy for lunch. This is true, and it's true in our families too. building the right culture within our families is way more important than the strategy whatever strategy we have about what we want our kids to do when they grow up or what path we want them to follow. If we build the right culture, everything else will work out.
So can you tell us more about building culture then? Can you talk to us about, from your mind, how, like, what's your how? You've had multiple companies and it sounds like you have a fantastic culture now. How do you build culture? And of course, is that different in your family or not?
Yeah, so I'm still learning, I will say. Every day I learn something new. And maybe by example, we built this business around values. And it was something that we had from day one. And maybe 2 or 3 years into the business, we were, the Deseret News did a story on the best businesses to work for in Utah. And we were ranked the #1 business. And I was so proud of it. And maybe a month later, one of our earliest employees came to me and she said, Davis, I want to talk to you. Like, the culture is changing. It's like, as we've grown, it's just not the same as it was in the early days, which is true, And she kind of told me about some of the things that she'd seen. And in my head, I was like, didn't you just see that article? We're #1 place to work. But she was right. I had maybe lost focus or lost track of some things as we started to grow. And so what I realized is this isn't just setting up these core values and setting up some great rituals and traditions in the beginning and then letting it happen. It's like every day. It's everyday focus. Every single day you have to spend time investing in this. So during COVID, I'm working from home now, but I reach out to a member of my team every single day, someone that I don't work with on a regular basis, and I just check in and just see how they're doing. You add that up, and it's like I'm basically reaching out to every one of my employees a few times throughout the year, and they know I care about them. One thing I talk a lot about is love. I think this is like one of the most underutilized tools in business and in leadership. You never hear politicians talk about love. You rarely hear a CEO talk about love. And it is one of the most powerful tools for people. And when we have our all hands meeting, at the end, I always finish by telling my team, I love you and I care about you. And when the team knows that you love them and that you really care about them, they're willing to do anything for you. And I'll do anything for them. And so I'd say the same thing goes with a family. Like, if your kids know that you love them, and there's maybe 2 ways to think about, there's like a closed family system and there's an open family system. The closed family system is one where there's strict rules. And if you follow those rules, then you're welcome in the home and you are loved. And if you don't follow those rules, then there's no longer a place for you there. And then there's the open family system, which just says, no matter what you do, no matter who you are, we love you and there's a place for you here. And every family is somewhere on that spectrum. There's no family that's only this or only that. But we try to build within our company and within our family an open family system, something that says we are here for you. And no matter what's going on in your life, we love you and we will figure this out together.
I truly believe in the power of love at home and at work. I probably am not as open as you are about it at work, although I'd like to be. I use the power of love. Maybe that's the wrong way to say it, but I'm constantly thinking about how can I show love? How can I be a loving person at home and at work? Certainly. And I'm honestly, I think it might be the best thing that's ever happened at work. Certainly at home, it comes naturally, but I think at work too, that power of love it honestly can't be overexpressed.
No, the tendency is when you think, okay, if we have a culture that we love each other, then maybe that means that we can't tell each other like when something's not going right. Or in a business, it's like, oh, well, if I really love them, I'm not going to hurt their feelings. Mm-hmm. That's actually not very loving. It's not very kind to not give people feedback. So like, there's this great book called Radical Candor, which we all read as a company. And when you join our team, you read this book, and it talks about the importance of showing love and care. And that if you really love and care someone, that you're going to be able to be transparent with them and radically candid with them. You're going to be able to challenge them directly. But that only works if they know that you love them. So my co-founder in the business, he's our COO. His name's Stefan Jacob. He's German. We met in business school. And he's amazing. I could not ask for a better partner. And we love each other. I'm his son's godfather. And, we We've traveled, we kayaked from Cuba to Florida together. We've done survival trips together on deserted islands. Like, we've done some amazing things together. We did our master's thesis together in grad school. I know he loves me. And when he gives me feedback, and I ask for feedback in our one-on-one every time, like, I want to know what I can do better, how I can better support him or our team. When he gives me feedback, it's coming from a place of care and love. And so that's what we need to get in the habit of doing, is making sure people know how much we care and love them, and then be willing to challenge them and give direct feedback. Because that's how if we really love someone, we want them to be better.
Yeah, I think with our kids, you make a good point that if it's that open, right, I'm going to love you no matter what you do. Now I'm going to tell you, because of that, I can tell you, be honest with you. I can be candid with you about, hey, you need to do these things a little different.
Yeah.
Whether that be treat your brother this way, or work on your schoolwork, or, be kinder to your friends, whatever it might be. It's much easier, like you said, once the love is absolute or already there.
And I know you have like an almost 15-year-old daughter. I have a 15-year-old daughter. Kirk has a 15-year-old daughter. So it's like, we know, like, this works better, right? If your daughter, totally. Like, if she's feeling like a lot of love from you, and then you ask her to do something, or you suggest something they can do better, boy, that's a lot better. That's a lot better response than when they're not feeling love or cared for. So.
Absolutely. I want to switch gears just a little bit here, and talk to you about some of the things that you've gotten involved with that have to do with empowerment for girls and the advancement of women in leadership. You sit on a couple of boards whose main goal are those two things. And I want to know what that's done for you as a father of daughters, 17 and 15, why you're involved with those things, and does it have anything to do with having daughters?
Yeah.
And how we can all be better and more involved in those causes as well.
Yeah, this is an issue I'm really passionate about, and it is because I had daughters. I'm embarrassed to say I never thought about this issue until I had girls of my own. As a man, it was just not something I needed to think about. But it was when I had girls, I started seeing that they were treated differently than boys. Even in the small things that were said. A lot of times we tell boys to be tough, or to go, get up and try it again. We basically encourage them to take risk. And with girls, we tell them, "Oh, be careful." Or we all the time you hear, "Oh, you're so pretty." It's like, it's all about external. Their value is attached to like the way they look. Mm-hmm. And I just felt it was so frustrating, honestly, because I wanted my girls to be able to do anything, and I'd seen all these studies that showed that until about 4 or 5 years old, girls and boys were pretty similar in that they thought they could do anything. And I remember as a 4-year-old, there was a gentleman that we lived with in the Dominican Republic, a really nice older man. We'd go visit them at their home, and he would beat me. We'd arm wrestle, and he'd let me beat him. I legitimately thought I could beat this man in an arm wrestle, like as a 4-year-old. I thought I was so strong. And, at that age, you really kind of believe you can do anything. Around the age of 5 is when things started changing for girls, and boys believed they could do anything, and girls stopped believing that. In school, there's a bunch of studies that show when men take a difficult course in college, a math class, they will believe that they did really well in the class, and women will believe they did not do well in the class, or they're not very good at it, even though their grades would be the same. A man would get a B in the class and be like, "I crushed it," totally good at the subject. And a woman would get an A- or a B+ and think, "I'm not very good at this subject." So, again, this is just something I started observing, and I wanted to get involved. And as someone that's focused the last decade of my life on poverty alleviation, the one thing that I've learned, one truth I've learned, is that if you want to change the world, you start by empowering women. Women are the ones that are investing in everyone else. And so I'm involved in two great nonprofits, Girl Up, which is a United Nations Foundation nonprofit focused on empowering girls around the world, and an organization here in Utah called the Women's Leadership Institute that's run by Pat Jones, which is an amazing woman, an amazing leader, both politically and in business here in Utah. And so the objective of that organization is to is to help women in Utah be more involved in politics and to be able to lead in the boardroom. And so they do an amazing job training women in their careers and how to step up and play bigger leadership roles, to join boards. They have a session teaching women about politics and how to run for office, and they've seen tremendous success in the women that have taken this class and then run for office and won.
Fantastic.
So yeah,
that's really cool. Thanks for sharing those thoughts with us. You know, it's kind of a hot button topic, and a lot of people are just afraid to talk about it because they think they're going to say something wrong. They're going to offend somebody. And, you know, I think if we don't talk about it and give ourselves some slack that, hey, I'm learning about this, as we talk about it, I might say something that wasn't the way that I was supposed to say it, but I'm learning and I'm open to talking about this and having the dialogue and helping. I'm the same way. Like, I want my daughters to be able to just crush it, kill it. Anywhere they go, I want them to think, you know, they can do anything that they want to do in life. Yeah. And so I appreciate the work that you're
thanks.
That you're doing in those nonprofits.
You know, I would say I feel the same way though. Like, it's an intimidating topic, especially as a white man, right? So it's like, you don't want to say the wrong thing, and you still have to learn the language around, you know, how to talk about these things. I don't always get it right either. But it is important. And, you know, one way to start is by reading. Maybe another book recommendation would be Melinda Gates wrote a great book called The Moment of Lift. And she talks about why she and Bill have dedicated so much of their wealth to investing in girls and women. And so that was, I think, a great place to start.
Thanks for the recommendation. That's
well,
cool.
I think that leads to a question that we ask all of our people on the podcast, and that is a little bit of what does it mean to be a gentleman, and maybe talk about certainly how that relates to women, and then of course to raising kids.
Yeah, you know, I think being a gentleman is being someone that's always looking out for the underdog, always looking out for others instead of themselves. And when I think of the men and women that I admire the most in life, it's those people. Some of them have tremendous wealth. Some of them have almost nothing. But the common thread between all of them is that they are always thinking about other people ahead of themselves. And that's what I strive to be like. And I have a long way to go, but I want to be that type of gentleman.
Yeah, I like it. And I think you said in the very beginning of the podcast that that's where true joy comes from anyway. True happiness comes from thinking outside yourself and serving others.
Absolutely.
Davis Smith, thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to meet you, to get to know you on a personal level, and talk about these things that matter most to all of us. We appreciate you taking the time and coming in.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was special.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Davis.
Okay.